Good evening and welcome to Aware on the Air for the 19th week of 2015. Another week in which the Obama administration's drone assassination program, the most extensive global terrorism campaign the world has yet seen, is paralleled by overwhelming police killings in the U.S., far beyond what happens in other countries. Our program is presented by members and friends of AWARE, a local peace group. AWARE is an acronym for Anti-War, Anti-Racism Effort. I'm Carl Estabrook. AWARE is an association of residents of Champaign-Urbana who oppose the U.S. government's war-making, at home and abroad. Most Americans are unaware that President Obama is making war in 8 countries around the world: Afghanistan, Iraq, Libya, Pakistan, Somalia, Syria, Yemen, and the Philippines, in violation of the UN Charter, which forbids, quote, the threat or use of force against the territorial integrity or political independence of any state without the authorization of the UN Security Council. We're unaware that the President is sending American death squads, they're called Special Operation Forces, into more than 100 countries around the world, where their operations include kidnapping, we call it rendition, torture, and murder. We're unaware that the President is conducting the most extreme terrorist campaign of modern times, a secret series of murders by drone, which has already killed thousands, including American citizens and hundreds of children. And we're unaware that the President is recklessly provoking war with Russia and Ukraine, where a U.S. proxy government has already killed thousands, more than U.S. client state Israel killed in Gaza last year. Why has Obama, who was elected in part because of Americans' opposition to George Bush's dumb wars, outdone Bush in belligerence and expanded his wars in Europe, Asia, and Africa? The wars are not in the interest of the vast majority of Americans, who forego government services and are taxed to pay for them, to the point that the U.S. is the most unequal developed country, and is becoming more so at an increasing rate. But the wars are in the interest of a very few Americans, the very rich, the 1%, who profit enormously from the U.S. control of the world economy. The Obama administration is killing people around the world, but notably in MENA, as the Pentagon calls the Mideast and North Africa, and Eurasia, which are connected by world energy supplies, oil and gas, that the U.S. government intends to control. U.S. control over world energy flows gives it leverage over our economic rivals from Germany to China. Control of, not just access to, gas and oil was what the U.S. demands, and our government has been willing to kill a lot of people to ensure it. Wars conducted by U.S. presidents have killed, wounded, and made homeless well over 20 million human beings in the last 50 years, mostly civilians. Obama was elected on a platform of hope and change, but he's brought little hope and almost no change to U.S. war policy, except perhaps to lie more successfully about what he was doing than George Bush did. His policies are not different, but even more murderous. It's no wonder that the U.S. is hated around the world in the era of the Bush-Obama wars. President Obama is in the position of saying to those he calls our enemies, "Why do you hate us? All we want to do is invade your country, drone strike your women and children, steal your natural resources, and install a vassal king who will be useful to our imperial ambitions, and then call you a terrorist if you resist." Close quote. Champaign-Urbana AWARE recommends that you contact the President, our representatives in Congress, and tell them to stop killing people around the world and to bring U.S. troops home. The AWARE web page and Facebook page have email addresses and phone numbers for President Obama, Senator Dick Durbin, Senator Mark Kirk, Representative Rodney Davis. Vietnam veterans are in Washington, D.C. this weekend, lobbying against U.S. war-making. The Obama administration are today committing murder around the world, but pretending that they aren't, in order to mislead the only enemy they really fear, the American people, who drove 2 presidents from office during the Vietnam War. And the government is helped in this deception by a compliant, big business-run media, so Americans know far less about what's going on than citizens of other countries. Tonight we'll try to give you a better account with commentaries by Karen Aram and Ron Zoke, and I'll be back with a note or two. And Ron will begin with what he tells me is entitled, Embrace the Suck.
Yes, well, there was even a special about this phrase in National Public Radio recently. It's commonly used in the military, especially by NCOs who are telling their subordinates to do pointless, meaningless things. So we're just acquiescing here in the common and popular terminology of is it cool or does it suck? And maybe I'll be asking my colleagues here to pronounce upon it various things later. We're heading into another session of the Greek cliffhanger. It's more and more suspense day by day. Will Greece pay off its debts? Will they impose austerity and reimburse the IMF and the European Union for the money that's been loaned to them in overcoming the Greek financial crisis? The Greek finance minister is going to Brussels to the European Business Summit on Thursday. Mr. Varoufakis has appeared increasingly embattled in recent weeks, this says, after Eurozone finance minister sharply criticized his confrontational style and the Greek Prime Minister Alexis Tsipras reduced his prominence in negotiations with international lenders. The Greek authorities have not agreed to economic changes that are far-reaching enough to unlock 7.2 billion euros, nearly $8.1 billion in bailout money needed to prevent the country from defaulting on its loans. Mr. Varoufakis has scheduled to be joined by 5 other panelists, including Pierre Moscovici, the European Commissioner for Economic and Financial Affairs. Mr. Moscovici has frequently warned that imposing more austerity could foment anti-European sentiment, and he is widely seen as more conciliatory toward Greece than the other Eurozone officials. So little extortion going on here. Change your ways or you don't get the money. And the likely outcome of this is the increased prominence and power of the ultra-right-wing neo-Nazi and crypto-fascist movements that have already become more prominent in Greece. Another one from the Wall Street Journal today: the International Monetary Fund fears Greece's debt burden is becoming unsustainable again, and is warned that it may withhold bailout money unless the Eurozone agrees to debt relief. The representatives of Greece's anti-austerity government are set to meet European counterparts Tuesday today as their protracted negotiations between Athens and the Eurozone lenders continue. Greece faces a 750 million euro debt repayment to the IMF next week, but there are fears that it will run out of cash unless it reaches a deal with creditors to unlock the next tranche of bailout money. Eurozone officials have categorically ruled out a write-down of Greece's debt. So what this is likely to bring on is interesting and open to speculation. I received notice of a recent book on Amazon, the publisher's view of Mark Blyth, Austerity, the History of a Dangerous Idea. Austerity is not only coming to Greece, you may have noticed it's coming to the state of Illinois as well. Governments today, this review says, in both Europe and the United States have succeeded in casting government spending as reckless wastefulness that has made the economy worse. In contrast, they have advanced a policy of draconian budget cuts, austerity, to solve the financial crisis. We are told that we have all lived beyond our means and now need to tighten our belts. The view conveniently forgets that where all of that debt came from, not from an orgy of government spending, but as the direct result of bailing out, recapitalizing, and adding liquidity to the broken banking system. Through these actions, private debt was rechristened as government debt, while those responsible for generating it walked away scot-free, placing the blame on the state and the burden on the taxpayer. The burden now takes the form of a global turn to austerity, the policy of reducing domestic wages and prices to restore competitiveness and balance the budget. The problem, according to political economist Mark Blyth, is that austerity is a very dangerous idea. First of all, it doesn't work. As the past 4 years and countless historical examples from the past 100 years show, while it makes sense for any one state to try to cut its way to growth, it simply cannot work when all states try it simultaneously. All we do is shrink the economy. In the worst case, austerity policies worsened the Great Depression, and created the conditions for seizures of power by forces responsible for the Second World War, the Nazis and the Japanese military establishment. As Blyth amply demonstrates, the arguments for austerity are continuous and the evidence thin. Rather than expanding growth and opportunity, the repeated revival of this dead economic idea has almost always led to low growth along with increases in wealth and income inequality. Austerity demolishes the conventional wisdom, marshaling an army of facts to the book Austerity. Demolishes the conventional wisdom, marshaling an army of facts to demand that we recognize austerity for what it is and what it costs us. So I think this is a salutary warning about what's coming. What it amounts to, as I complained here a week or two ago, is a massive transfer of wealth from the middle and working classes to the very rich. And we can't have a default on the bondholders, who are very wealthy people typically around the world, especially in Germany. And this conflict that's developed between between Greece and Germany is kind of exemplary of what seems to have been going on. So maybe we can return to that if needed. Meanwhile, of course, we're hearing quite a bit more from time to time about the subsidies and incentives being offered to businesses to locate in Illinois and in Champaign-Urbana and so on. But for the poor, the struggling, the people in ill health with dependents and so on, we're not hearing anything about subsidies and incentives to them. So I think it sucks.
Thank you, Ron. You are watching Aware on the Air. We're talking about the war policy of the United States, the war policy of the Obama administration as it is being carried out at home and abroad. And we'll go now to Karen Aram for some talks about how it's going on abroad.
Well, actually, first I'd like to ask
Sure.
Ron how to spell Mark Blyth's name.
B-L-Y-T-H.
B-L-Y-T-H, and the name of his book?
Is simply called Austerity.
Okay. Okay, I can find it on Amazon.
Oh, sure.
No, that sounds quite
Yeah,
worthwhile reading.
Austerity, the history of a dangerous idea.
Okay. Yeah, yeah.
We may want to take up this topic right now since you presented it and pointed out how important it is, Ron. I mean, the only thing I differ with perhaps in your account is the notion that austerity is, as it were, on the way. You know, austerity is coming to the state of Illinois with the new administration. Austerity is coming to America. I mean, austerity, hey, it's already here.
Yeah.
Yes.
Austerity is the name of the policy that American governments have been following in some form or another for almost 4 decades.
Yeah.
And the confiscation of the living standards of the vast majority of Americans parallels the confiscation of the living standards of Europeans that has been explicitly discussed under the title of austerity. We just haven't used the word quite so much.
That's it. Browner's not using the word yet. But,
Exactly.
Right.
But the fact is coming.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, it's an important datum that wages in the United States, which increased for everyone, the rich and the poor alike, basically from the Second World War to the 1970s, turned around in the 1970s. And from the 1970s on, wages in America have been essentially flat for most Americans or declining. I mean, this is an epical change. It's really quite remarkable, and it occurred. It took us almost 30 years to notice it. Of course, the people whose wages were being stopped noticed it, but in terms of something that was happening in the society as a whole, and that was the introduction of austerity. That's the definition of austerity. It took us for a long time to even begin to talk about it. And the problem is that this is not an accident. Austerity, under the name of neoliberalism in America for almost 4 decades, is a conscious policy in which the American business class said, look, we've gone too far from Roosevelt through Lyndon Johnson in providing social services for people, everything from Social Security to Medicare. We've got to cut back, not for reasons of the structure of the economy, but for the reasons of the profits of the 1%. They want to cut back because they don't want to spend that money on those undeserving people. And we've seen that slightly as an ideology, but the facts, the actual policies preceded the ideological arguments for it. And the ideological arguments were pretty weak, but we've heard them now for a good while. And as a result, we've seen a massive shift to the right of the American political parties in order to accommodate those arguments for austerity. But only at the end, only recently, have we begun to talk about austerity in this way.
Headline in the local paper on May 1st, House OK's budget targeting Obamacare. Washington, AP, the House on Thursday adopted a compromised GOP budget that promises to speed repeal of President Barack Obama's health care law while giving the Pentagon an additional $38 billion.
Exactly.
To buy weapons to kill.
Yep.
It's not as if the U.S. government is out of money. It's not as if the U.S. government can't find money to spend on wars in the Middle East and Africa and Eurasia. That's all easy, and everyone knows it. The late economist John Kenneth Galbraith pointed out that no one turns down a check signed by the United States of America. The notion that the U.S. just can't afford to do anything that actually helps people is nonsense. And the idea that the way to balance the budget for the United States, as if that's a good thing, the way to balance the budget for the United States as if the United States, like a single family, has to be sure that it doesn't spend much more than it takes in. The way to do that is to take back those services to individuals, take back those social supports, take back everything from education to medical care that was provided in the wake of the Second World War. This is nonsense, but it's nonsense of such a high order, so to speak, that is really rarely confronted straight on. And it seems to me that's what we have to do. If one is actually worried about the business cycle, about the expansion of the economy and so forth, how to do that has been clear for a century. That's the whole point of the economic work in Europe and America between the wars, between the First and Second World War, particularly that associated with the name of John Maynard Keynes. Keynes pointed out that if you want an economy to work well, you have to have people buying things.
Yes.
You have to have what he called aggregate demand. You have to have an economy in which people want to produce things and give jobs to people who will help produce them because they can sell them, because there's someone out there to buy them. What's the easiest way to get people to buy things? Give them money.
Right.
And, you know, these are not hard questions. They are politically hard questions because they demand the reversal of what we've seen for 40 years, that is the concentration of money in fewer and fewer hands and an acceleration concentration of money there. That's what has to change, and it has to change in the sense that the very real reasons for expanding the economy fly in the face of the concentration of money in the hands of the few.
Well, what will happen, you always get this reply, there's the moral hazard there. People may be getting something for nothing. And they have to learn the value of work, and they must be made to struggle and earn by the sweat of their brow this money. They can't become dependent on welfare, and we've already seen far too much of that. And that is a problem for a whole lot of people.
It's vicious nonsense.
Yeah,
It
people
is
will start
vicious
thinking there's a free lunch,
nonsense.
and there is a free lunch for the right people, the wealthy people. But alas,
Exactly.
we must avoid this moral hazard by not letting the poor people think that there's a free lunch anywhere.
It's the, sorry, Ken.
I was just going to say, if you've ever lived amongst the elite, if you have ever worked for corporations, believe me, you know who's working and you know who's not. And the people at the top, maybe they worked at one time, but most of the millionaires and the bankers today did not work their way up. We know most of the money people gain their money, and not necessarily from inheritance, but from their investments. And that's not a lot of work, okay? So, yeah, it's...
The nonsense of that argument is, in fact, the moral hazard argument that Ron is talking about. It's particularly vicious and specious when American politicians talk about how, well, we need to develop a work ethic among the lower classes. We don't use that term in America, but that's what we're talking about, and we know it. We have to develop that work ethic there. But, of course, there aren't any jobs. When this problem was encountered in the Great Depression in America, the Roosevelt administration was finally forced to produce what was called the Works Progress Administration, which was an arrangement to get jobs for Americans who wanted them. It was viciously opposed by the American business class, the same class that's in charge right now of American austerity. Well, Roosevelt's program was a program to produce jobs for Americans in the Depression, was strongly opposed by the American business class for an obvious reason. If jobs were available to Americans by government intervention, they would not have to go to the employers, to the 1%, and work at whatever wages the 1% wanted to offer. It would have, as they say, an upward pressure on wages. Yes, exactly, of course it would. But that was so dangerous to the pocketbooks of the contemporary 1% during the Depression. They fought Roosevelt's WPA as hard as they could and abolished it as soon as they could once production for war picked up with the coming of the Second World War. When, in fact, before America was actually involved in the war, but when the writing was on the wall about the coming of the war. So the business of providing jobs for Americans, to say nothing of providing what everyone also admits as the even more obvious solution, that is a guaranteed annual income for Americans, the unwillingness to do that is directly involved with the American 1% ability to extract work at a low cost from workers. You're going to raise wages if you make jobs available. We can't have that.
Yeah. Well, if you give people money, they'll be out there just buying steaks and seafood and stuff, and we have to prevent
Which
that.
is fine unless you happen to be in the business of providing steak and seafood, unless you
Right.
might think it's a good idea.
Actually, yeah, seafood coming from the New Orleans area where people have been harmed by the oil spills. Yeah. Can I mention Podemis here when it's in relation to Syriza? I want to mention Podemis. RT reported recently that the leader, Podemis is the Spanish counterpart to Syriza of
Syriza
Greece.
in Greece, yeah.
Yeah. The leader of Podemis recently resigned, and it's supposed to have been amicable, but it's due to idealistic differences. So I don't know what that is, and I don't even know his name, but I think that means Podemis deserves watching. And I thought to myself, oh, here we go again. The left is always, we get down into these little details, and pretty soon we're disunited. But it deserves watching. A lot of the people have been very critical of Syriza, claiming that, and I was one of the first people who spoke out immediately after they took power, when I saw some of their actions on the basis that they were coming from the elite, and therefore they were, subject to distrust. This is coming from the left, the far left. And I do take a different attitude now. I take the wait and see attitude, because I've read other things about them and I also understand what it's like. They're still in the position of using strategy. They're working with Russia. This month they're meeting with China. So I can see why they're not just slamming the door and defaulting, which will bring about pretty catastrophic results. And so they're still hoping that they'll make progress with the EU. Now, I just want to say that I think this distrust of anyone coming from the elite is misguided. I think that we've had too many leaders who were coming from the elite, but that shouldn't say that they don't have empathy and that they can't lead. So we're not talking about people who are currently occupying the elite, but we've had many leaders throughout history that came from the elite. One need not always come from the working class to be considered reputable in this respect. That's my opinion. Okay. Yeah. I wanted to mention a couple things in relation to what's going on internationally that was bothering me a lot this week. One is having seen the pictures of the individuals that a year ago were burned alive in Odessa as a result of our support for the Kiev government. I don't remember the numbers. Carl, Ron, do you remember the numbers of people who died in that fire? Well, it was very disturbing when you see the actual faces of them. There were quite a few. 116 sticks in my mind, but I'm not sure of the accuracy of that. When you have young people, you see, teenagers holding their kittens and their puppy dogs, and you see older people. It's very disturbing, and I think this is something that needs to be pointed out other than just on Facebook. Another disturbing event is the cluster bombs that have been dropped on Yemen by Saudi Arabia, and the cluster bombs are those that were sold to Saudi by the U.S. The U.S. and Saudi, of course, did not sign on to the treaty of 2008 that the rest of the international community signed on to that outlaws cluster bombs and landmines. And that shows premeditation as far as I'm concerned. That means that they didn't sign on to it because they knew they were going to sell them, and they knew that they were going to be dropping them and using them. So that, to me, is clear premeditation on the part of the U.S. and Saudi. Not that we haven't, I think the Kyoto Agreement we never signed on to, the International Criminal Court we never signed on to. Okay, there are many more things. And one of the things that I found of interest was that that the U.S. There is an exclusion in that treaty, and it is one perhaps solution for some. It was brought up on Democracy Now! Yesterday, I think, that the exclusion regarding some mines was, and these cluster bombs, which are known as CD-105, are the exception, and it's because they're so ineffective. But yet they did kill. I'm foggy on the numbers of people. I have a number of 31, but I know that most of them were children that were killed in that cluster bomb in Yemen. That was the second thing that I found very disturbing. A third thing was hearing about, it didn't happen this week, but hearing about the ghost of Iguala. Igala. It's a book by Brian Devereaux, and he writes for The Intercept. And he talks about the disappearance of Mexico, the 43 disappeared of Mexico. That took place in December 2014. And bottom line, I won't go into the details of Mexico, but at the end of the day, what they're asking for, the people and the parents of the disappeared who refuse to accept that their children are dead, because they know that once they accept that they're dead, that there will be no investigation, no further action will be taken. Not that there's any action on the part of the governments being taken now, other than the U.S. continuing to send weapons to Mexico to fight the drug war. And it's a result of the drug wars that 30,000 people have disappeared in Mexico, and 43 were these students in December. And again, when you hear the details of what probably took place, and the one body that, or not, I can't call it a body, the remains of one teenager that was found, it's extremely disturbing. I actually watch Game of Thrones and The Walking Dead and feel relaxed compared to what I see and hear and read about. I know a lot of people who won't watch those shows because they're so gory and they're so horrible and violent, and I keep thinking, no, the violence is out there, it's happening now around the world, and it's a result of the U.S. government, for which we as the people are responsible. So that's why I say I can sit and watch violent TV and theatrical programs knowing that they are just theater.
Maybe that's the reason for the programs. It's a distraction.
For me, it's a distraction.
Think about the fantasy rather than Mexico on the war on drugs.
Some people theorize that it causes people to be more violent, and I think that that's
the other
very
way.
possible. I think it brings out violence in some people, and so I don't deny that. I find for me it does not. I still react strongly to the violence that takes place in the world, so much that I want to spend my time here and out protesting as opposed to actually earning some money or doing something worth, for myself. So I know that I'm not made violent by watching violent TV programs.
What I'm suggesting is that violent media may be precisely a distraction for, it's like the phrase bug splat used for Obama's killings by drone and so forth. If you can turn it into something that's sort of dramatic but not too serious, if you can displace it, as the shrinks say, then you don't have to worry about it so much. So instead of dead children killed as a result of the U.S. war on drugs in Mexico, we can think about characters in a medieval Never Never Land on Game of Thrones and displace all the blood and murder into that. Then we say, that's just a movie.
Okay, I don't know. I know Game of Thrones, I think it was the week before last, they were burning someone at the stake, which is, the story of Joan of Arc, which I learned as a child, and I've had nightmares about that throughout my life. And it was so horrific. And in discussion with someone else, it was like, well, somebody said they couldn't even watch it because it was so horrific. A humanitarian actually shot him so that he wouldn't burn to death. And then I read about all of these people being killed in Odessa last year during that protest, and it was so horrific and so deliberate. And I'm thinking, we're talking about so many lives out there being destroyed, and then the cluster bombs, and what do we think bombs are, and what do we think drones do? Yeah, it's pretty disturbing, and yesterday was the anniversary of the killing at Kent State University, for which I think we all have a memory of as to where we were on that day. I won't go into that. I think somebody said next week, if I'm not mistaken, or next month, we should be focusing on the 1968 massacre of students at Jackson State, which I had not known about until fairly recent. Which goes to show how the media focuses deliberately on some things and not on others. Anyway, I will leave it at that. I think I've said enough.
The point of Kent State, of course, was that armed agents of the U.S. government murdered unarmed students.
Right.
And that the reality of that is, in a sense, so shocking that it has to be displaced into, oh, well, that was the 60s, and that was, the students were rioting after all, weren't they? We've had a lot of that recently in regard to the anniversaries relating to the Vietnam War, including letters in the local papers saying, well, you know, returning soldiers were spat upon. This once again is retrospective justifications of what is probably the greatest international crime since the Second World War, that is the American attack on Southeast Asia, that may have killed 4 million people. Now, there's some way we have to take that in. And one way to take that in is to turn it into a television series, or to turn it into a memory long ago, that was then, this is now, so forth and so on. It has to be put aside in some fashion. And an awful lot of the accounts that we're seeing these days, in part because of the anniversaries, is a matter of this putting aside. I was interested to see that the Vietnam Veterans for Peace, an old anti-war group, was fighting against that by making the connection between the war 40 years ago and the wars today. They're in Washington this week lobbying against America's current wars on the grounds that these are crimes of the same sort as the ones that they were forced to participate in 40 and 50 years ago. This is important. This is the way these things should be remembered.
Right.
Yeah. Let's talk about Tiananmen Square instead.
Well, if,
Oh, that's coming up next month.
it would be worthwhile.
But you're right, that's what we do in America.
Yeah.
We,
It would be worthwhile to interpret that one way or another.
Yeah.
You're watching Aware on the Air. We have been joined by our friend Michael Bai. What's
Yes.
on your mind, Michael?
Yeah, in remembrance of the Kent State murderings, I would like to report about a murdering of an unarmed African American, Freddie Gray. Yesterday in Baltimore, officials have lifted a 10 p.m. curfew, and National Guard troops have begun to withdraw as peaceful protests continue over the death of Freddie Gray. The curfew had been in place since an uprising last Monday night took place, which left buildings and cars on fire. But protests took on cautiously optimistic tone Friday after Baltimore State Attorney Marilyn Mosby announced a range of charges, including murder and manslaughter, against the 6 officers involved in Gray's arrest and transport. Gray's family says his voice box was crushed and his spine was 80% severed at his neck. Police said they arrested Gray for looking a lieutenant in the eye, then running away. Mosby said police had illegally arrested Gray without probable cause, then ignored his pleas for medical help. I cite her, "The findings of our comprehensive, thorough, and independent investigation, coupled with the medical examiner's determination that Mr. Gray's death was a homicide, which we received today, has led us to believe that we have probable cause to file criminal charges." In parallel to that, Kevin Moore, who filmed one of the videos of Freddie Gray's arrest, has spoken out after he was arrested and released without charge. "I was arrested last night on some false, bogus intimidation, like they really tried to intimidate me. They really tried, and they took me down to precinct for like 6-7 hours. I don't get no charge papers. I don't get no citations. I don't get none of that. So what am I being charged for? You know what I mean? What am I being detained for?" The fact that people who film police brutality are being arrested while police officers stay on free feet until a state's attorney files charges is showing the way the police interprets its role as of now and uses it as an authority over normal citizens. The filing of criminal charges against the police is a first major step against police brutality in this country, but we still have to continue our protests, our oppositional movement in order to fight police brutality and hopefully end it eventually.
Thank you, Michael.
At last notice, they were still getting paid, all the policemen.
Yes.
I'd like to insist that the things that we've been talking about here this evening, the police killings in America, particularly the recent killings in Baltimore, austerity, and war, are all connected. These are not isolated and distinct issues. They have to do with the social policy of the United States of America. That is to say, the social policy of the United States government. It's not like the weather. It happens to us. Actually, that's a poor example because, of course, the social policy of the United States government is also bound up with the weather these days in ways that may turn out to be quite dangerous. But my point was made actually in an article in the peculiar British newspaper, The Guardian, this week. And it's significant that it's not an American newspaper that did it. The title was, "The Rebellion in Baltimore is an Uprising Against Austerity." The scholar quoted in the article, which we'll put up on the Facebook page for Aware, says these things don't happen, the forms of racial oppression that we're familiar with in America, don't happen because a bunch of white people wake up one day and say, let's start chattel slavery so we can oppress black people. And now slavery is gone. They say, we'll have Jim Crow laws. And when they're gone, they'll say, we'll have a prison industrial complex. No, these things have to do with how capitalism works. The rebellions in Ferguson and Baltimore and beyond are uprising against austerity, sparked by police murder and about all of the relationships and conditions that make the murder possible. It seems to me that there is an effort on various sides in American politics to separate some of these things, to suggest that war and racism, the war on drugs and austerity, that these things are somehow separable and largely unconnected problems, and as Ron was explaining a moment ago, may have to do with bad attitudes of people who have to be re-educated in various ways. This is nonsense. We're talking about the political activities of the people who run this society, and those are what have to be changed. Comments, friends?
Well, we have another editorial by David Brooks this morning.
Yeah,
about
that's exactly on my mind.
yeah.
Oh, yes.
About
This is in the New York Times.
yeah.
Brooks is a columnist for the Times.
You have to let the lower orders know that the problem is some inner defect of those people.
Yeah.
And,
Are you serious? He said
well,
that?
they don't.
Yeah.
He doesn't put it in exactly
Oh,
those
I
terms.
hope not.
But we can read the subtext.
Yes.
God.
Yes.
Yeah, well, I stopped reading him a long time ago.
This is important in terms of American domestic policy as well as American foreign policy. Arundhati Roy wrote a number of years ago, the U.S. government refuses to judge itself by the same moral standards by which it judges others.
Right.
Its technique is to position itself as the well-intentioned giant whose good deeds are confounded in strange countries by their scheming natives, whose markets it's trying to free, whose societies it's trying to modernize, whose women it's trying to liberate, whose souls it's trying to save. The U.S. government has conferred upon itself the right and freedom to murder and exterminate people. And Arundhati Roy is talking there specifically about the American approach to foreign societies that it wants to control for the benefit of its own 1%. But it's important to see that that same account applies to Ferguson, Missouri, and Baltimore, Maryland, and the other places in which the populace is objecting to the sorts of control that the police are asserting, not by accident, but as a result of conscious government policies. Anyone who thinks that the outlandish difference in police killings in this country and Germany has to do with accidental natures of the differences in society are quite wrong. These are social policies chosen by the government of the United States of America. And unless we begin to see that that's the level at which these things have to be dealt with, we probably won't get very far.
Yeah, there are several layers of justification for this kind of thing. You must accept that we are the good guys, and it is our natural, inherent, God-given right to be the leaders of the world. And this is because either A, we're so virtuous, or B, we're so powerful, or probably some combination of the two. And it is inherently good and right that we do this. We're supplying leadership to the rest of the world. And if you read the justifications, not only of Barack Obama, but other top people in society, this is always the line that comes up, that we are the leaders, and we have to deal with those people who don't acquiesce in our leadership of the entire globe.
It's interesting how it comes home, and the same thing is being said to the people who are demonstrating in Baltimore. And once again, that's not an accident. The continuity is explicit in terms of American policy.
Well, I think it's so ironic the way we express concern over one or two lives being lost when we know we don't care about the millions that we're responsible for. I mean, I like the Facebook posting that came out last year regarding Boko Haram. You know, the U.S., we had to send military troops over to find the lost girls. It was, I mean, to some of us, it was pretty obvious what this meant. Yeah, more troops in Africa. But, and of course, they still, I think, only recently may have found them. But it was a comment about, well, since when do Americans care about black lives? I mean, or, you know, killing black girls, black women. Since when do we care about that? So to me, it should be so obvious, the things that we do here to our people, and then suddenly claim this with such hypocrisy that we are concerned about one or two individuals abroad or a few individuals elsewhere in the world.
It's been pointed out that the brilliance of American political control is a matter of controlling what people know. More primitive societies, if you want to put it that way, have to control what the populace knows by the knout in the prison cell. It has to censor newspapers and throw people into jail if they say the wrong thing and so forth. In this country, we have a much more sophisticated system that's bound up with the great American cultural achievement of the 20th century, advertising. And we construct a political world for Americans to live in that means Americans are far less aware of the structures of their own society, to say nothing of what their government is doing abroad, than citizens of other countries might be. It's been pointed out that not only do Americans not know what's going on, they don't know that they don't know. And that's the brilliance of the system. It works very well that way. When you refuse to see, when you are made unable to see the connections between war, austerity, racism, and the in the policy of the American government.
In the last few minutes, we can have another controversial topic introduced here. What do you think about Robert Nyman's recent push to emphasize that we should have less war?
I just saw the headlines and I deleted it. I'm sorry, less war, so I don't even know what he said.
Is that cool,
Tell
or does it suck?
Well, tell me what he said, because I just deleted
That's Ron's
less
interpretive
war.
principle for the evening.
Okay, less war. I mean, yeah, I saw that.
He starts out quoting Peter Beinart, saying that there's usually a lot of enthusiasm for wars at the beginning, but then they go sour after 2 or 3 years at most. And I think the fact is they become boring, like everything else in the mass
And
media.
so we need a new season of Game of Thrones, or a new show, right?
So the wars tend to drag on now. 10, 12 years, and they become boring, routine, and it's time for some new kind of sensation, which the popular media are supposed to provide. But anyway, what do we say about this? Do we say we demand that wars be stopped entirely, or do we try to moderate it, tamp it down, and convince people we should have less war? Do we go whole hog or nothing? In that case, I'm afraid what we'll get is actually nothing. But
Right.
It does sort of have the aspect of encountering a serial murderer, and it's
Yeah.
look,
Kill
could you
less
just cut
people.
back by about 20%? You know, I mean, only kill 8
Right.
people this week rather
Yes.
than 10, eh?
Right,
I
right.
mean-
And just make sure those 8 people are down the street on the other street.
Exactly.
Not in my
That's the
neighborhood.
important point.
Yeah.
Another anniversary that perhaps bears on this question, come to think of it, that's worth remembering today. It's the Cinco de Mayo, the Mexican holiday of, in fact, resistance to imperialism, resistance to colonialism. In 1862, on the 5th of May, a small Mexican military force was able to defeat a French expeditionary force in Mexico at the Battle of Puebla, and stopped or put a check on the attempt by the French to establish a Mexican empire in the person of the younger brother of the Austrian emperor, who was Maximilian, who was being placed on a throne for that Mexican empire. It's an aspect of North American history that most North Americans, at least in this country, don't know about at all, but it's very important in terms of the traditions of popular resistance to imperialism that do indeed characterize the last 2 centuries. So to celebrate the Cinco de Mayo is to celebrate the opposition to American war-making abroad, which is parallel to the war-making of the Third French Empire in 1862, and the tradition of popular resistance to foreign control controlled by an imperial ruling class. So happy Cinco de Mayo to one and all. And it occurs to me that the American way of celebrating Cinco de Mayo has, almost by accident, been to send our Secretary of State to Somalia in Africa. John Kerry arrived yesterday in Somalia, a country with a history that Americans also don't know, but a country that has been a victim of American imperial machinations over the last generation in a way that we hear about it at all. We hear about it in the way that Ron was just talking about, movies like Black Hawk Down and so forth, in which the international bad guys are being confronted by noble Americans. This is an occasion in which we should learn the real history, and unfortunately we don't, and it's not an accident that we don't.
Well, Dirty Wars is probably the best film related to Somalia and our actions there. I have something positive to say, to tell, and that is Chile. As of yesterday, I noted that evidently they're going to make all university education free. And I remember talking about in 2011, because I had read about how they, Chilean students were demonstrating against the student debt in their country. And so when I see that now they, as a result of all the student demonstrations, they will have free education. So I'm seeing it as a result of their beginning to counter student debt. And all I can say out there is students unite around the world, really, especially here in America, where the debt is so high.
Well, on Cinco de Mayo, I'm going out to strike a blow against imperialism by drinking lots of margaritas.
That seems a very good way to do it. You're buying, right?
Michael, do you want to announce about the coal divestment?
Yes, yeah. So on Thursday from 11 a.m. to 12:30 p.m., the UAUC Beyond Coal Divestment Group is staging a protest starting on Svanland and going over to the main quads in order to fight Chancellor Weiss's decision to not consider a 6-1 student vote to divest for the university to divest from fossil fuels. If you want to contribute and join our fight against this decision, feel free to join us. It's for a more sustainable future.
Why, who do you suppose the university is working for, Michael? Come on now.
Right.
Aren't we complaining about, business as usual, literally? I think we are. In the local academy, a little university down the street, there's a kerfuffle blowing up over the fact that faculty members are going to be investigated in regard to their background much more closely before they're hired now. After all, we may end up with faculty members who actually criticize murders by the Israeli government.
Yeah.
We can't have that.
That's uncivil.
That's uncivil.
God.
And we certainly have to make sure that the government steps in and investigates the background of faculty
So,
members in that regard.
incivility versus immorality and criminality. I mean, it's ludicrous.
You've been watching Aware on the Air, presented by members and friends of Aware, the anti-war, anti-racism effort of Champaign-Urbana, a local peace group. Our show is produced and directed by Jason Liggett. Thanks to him also, this program and others like it will be available on YouTube. Congratulations to Jason and his colleagues for winning 2 awards from the Alliance for Community Media. See the Facebook page for Aware for articles referred to by the panel this evening and announcements of upcoming events. Finally, Aware honors those who reveal the crimes of the U.S. government, which the rest of the world knows about, but Americans don't. Manning, Assange, Snowden, and the rest, who are being persecuted by the Obama administration. Now, this is Carl Esterbrook for Ron Zoke, Karen Evans-Levy, Stuart Levy, Karen Aram, Michael Bai, David Johnson, David Green, and other members and friends of Aware, saying in the words of the late Edward Murrow, good night and good luck.